When supply lines collapsed in World War II, knives stopped being issued equipment and became personal survival projects. Partisans, prisoners of war, downed airmen and civilians trapped in occupied territory didn't talk about custom blades. They talked about whether a knife would snap, bend, or hold an edge, when food, defense and escape depended on it. These methods were refined through failure, injury and necessity. What follows breaks down exactly how knives were made under wartime conditions, with specific materials, ratios, and decisions that kept blades functional instead of decorative. Salvaging high-carbon steel was the first and most critical decision. The single biggest mistake inexperienced survivalists make is starting with the wrong steel. World War II knife makers learned early that mild steel wasted time and energy. The most reliable sources of high-carbon steel were truckleaf springs, coil springs, agricultural tools, files, and broken bayonets. Once steel was identified, it was reduced in size by cold methods when fuel was scarce. Hacksaws, chisels, and repeated hammer strikes over an anvil substitute were used. A practical wartime ratio was starting with steel at least 30% thicker than the final blade to account for material lost during forging and grinding. Fighters who started too thin ended up with warped or brittle knives. Shaping the blade relied on controlled forging, not brute force. Forging was done only when heat could be maintained evenly. Improvised forges were shallow pits lined with clay or packed earth, fueled by charcoal scavenged from burned structures or made from hardwood. Airflow was more important than fuel volume. A simple hand bellows or foot-pumped air source was enough if steady. The rule was consistency over intensity. Steel heated too fast cracked later. Blades were heated to a dull cherry red, never orange. Shaping focused first on the spine, then the edge, then the point. WWII knife makers spent roughly 3 shaping passes on the spine for every 1 pass on the edge. This kept the blade thick where strength mattered. Tang formation was slow and deliberate. Overworking the tang caused stress fractures that showed up only after the knife was finished. After forging, the blade was normalized. This meant heating it back to cherry red and letting it cool in still air, and this process was repeated 2 or 3 times. Fighters who skipped normalization often ended up with blades that broke during quenching. Hardening depended on controlled quenching with whatever liquids were available. Hardening turned soft steel into a usable blade, but honestly, it also destroyed many knives. Oil quenching was preferred whenever possible. Use motor oil, animal fat, or even cooking oil all worked just fine. Water was really a last resort. When water had to be used, it was often mixed with ash or fine soil to slow cooling, and a common ratio was 1 part ash to 4 parts water. The blade was heated evenly until it lost magnetic attraction, then plunged edge first into the quench. The blade was never dropped straight down. A slow forward and back motion prevented steam pockets that caused cracks. Tempering balanced edge retention with real-world durability. Tempering was done without thermometers. Colour was everything. The blade was cleaned, then heated gently from the spine, often by laying it across hot metal or holding it near the forge instead of in it. As heat travelled toward the edge, colours appeared. Pale straw meant maximum hardness. Bronze meant flexibility. Most World War II survival knives were tempered until the edge showed straw and the spine showed darker bronze. A practical method used was reheating for short intervals, allowing the blade to cool between passes. 2 to 3 tempering cycles were common. Grinding and edge geometry were designed for abuse, not sharpness alone. Grinding was, well, slow and manual. Files, riverstones, and hand-turned wheels were standard. WWII knives favoured thick spines with gradual tapers. A common field ratio was spine thickness at the handle, equal to roughly 1/3 the blade width. This gave strength without excessive weight. Edges were left slightly thick until all heat treatment was complete. Final sharpening was done with stone, concrete, or ceramic scraps. The edge angle was wider than modern bushcraft standards. This sacrificed razor sharpness for edge life. Fighters preferred an edge that stayed usable after hitting bone, nails, or frozen wood. Handles were built to survive moisture, vibration, and impact. Handle materials were chosen for availability and grip, not comfort. Leather washers cut from belts or boots were stacked tightly on hidden tangs, soaked, then compressed until dry. Wood slabs were burned onto hot tangs for tight fits, then pinned or peened. Cloth handles were soaked in resin, glue, or tar when nothing else was available. Balance mattered. A common guideline was keeping handle weight close to blade weight to avoid fatigue and poor control. Smooth handles were avoided. Slight texture prevented slippage with wet or bloody hands. Why these World War II knife-making methods still matter to serious survivalists. These World War II knife-making methods weren't about craftsmanship. They were about survival under pressure. Every step was shaped by scarcity, danger, and consequence. Learning them forces discipline, patience, and respect for materials. Tools fail, skills don't. If this knowledge matters to you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel, share this guide with other survivalists, and keep these wartime skills alive, because the moment modern systems fail, old methods stop being history and start being necessity.